It's not a mystery that horror has taken a huge plunge into the unknown ever since Chris Redfield started punching boulders for a living. The point in time might not be accurate, but what cannot be denied is that when the PS3 era started, survival horror players weren't as slick as they thought they were anymore. Actually, the ones getting to procreate and take human evolution into its next step were the action horror hybrid enjoyers who preferred Call of Dutying their way through a horror scenario. For the real fans of the genre, however, the few of us left, those were not the times. Nevertheless, we kept pushing. Despite the atrocities that spawned along the way, Capcom gave us a glimpse of hope in 2017 with Resident Evil 7, only to abandon us again. Everything seemed lost. My Doritos bag's chance to make me eat it and do some trick shots were getting louder and louder. Fears to Fathom and Dark would calm me down, but I was still craving a good fright. Until Silent Hill 2 Remake was announced. Despite the bad reception that their trailers had, many will agree with me that this is one of the best psychological horror games of all time. So let me tell you what it does right. 1. It doesn't rely on jump scares. I once read a comment somewhere that said, relying on jump scares to scare someone is like a comedian tickling their audience to make them laugh. And I fell in love with this analogy because of how real it is. Silent Hill 2 has much more in its bag than a few yawning jump scares, but when they do it, they can be quite effective. This one is an exception to the book of jump scare rules, because when we entered that lady's bathroom, we knew something freaky was going to happen, and yet that scream made our foreskin crawl. Others are more subtle, like this one, where you enter this place, see there's no way out, and one of the best aspects of jump scares in this game is that most of them come from not paying attention to your surroundings. And yes, I'm talking about the mannequins. This enemy likes to hide around corners, inside bathroom stalls, under tables, but it is still partially visible most of the time, so you're only going to get jump scared by it if you are rushing through the level. It is a very smart way of encouraging the player to explore with care. You never know what will be waiting for you on the other side of that door. 2. The difficulty is well balanced. Let's take Outlast 2 as an example. I remember playing that game ages ago on normal difficulty and still dying over and over because I was getting lost. Sometimes the pathing you were supposed to follow was so unintuitive that people started calling Outlast 2 trial and error the game.
Mind you, it seems like all the other chase sequences take place in tight linear environments where gameplay descends into trial and error, and again, I'm not frightened, I'm annoyed.
It was absurd, and although Silent Hill 2 doesn't paint any ledges or walls with white ink to tell you where you're supposed to go, the level design feels like a perfect balance between the devs not holding your hand and not telling you exactly what you have to do at all times. If you take your time to explore, to find ammo and healing items and you're not a casual gamer, I would recommend going for the hard difficulty. Normal was too easy at times. I finished the game with approximately 20 health drinks and 20 syringes, and never had any issues with ammo. One of the few negative aspects of this game is that close quarters combat can be quite repetitive and easy to memorize. The first enemies can get 3 hit with the plank, then you have to evade because they are going to vomit acid, and there's no room for a 4th hit. Same with the mannequins, but 2 hits instead of 3, so the combat goes like this. Trigger, 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 dodge. Trigger, 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 dodge, rinse and repeat. We needed more variation in the enemy's moveset and behavior to increase the odds of running out of healing. 3. Excellent pacing. Pacing is something that has to be taken care of in any game, no matter the genre. Give the player too much action all the time and it will feel exhausting. Give the player a 15-minute walk with an NPC that talks about how utterly handsome Troy is, and you might get bored. In the case of Silent Hill 2, there is some good margin of acceptance by players, since, on the one hand, giving us a tad more action isn't that bad. The guns in this game are satisfying to use, especially the shotgun. And on the other hand, explosion rounds while chatting aren't that bad because characters are all very well designed. And because of the creep tick, nature of Silent Hill, players will look forward to some explanation as to what the fuck is going on here. No cutscenes with other characters or waltz with Maria overstage their welcome because they are well written. Angela being abused by her father is not something you'll understand right away, and the same applies to Eddie and his issues with people mocking him. Have you ever wondered why Laura moves around so freely and harmless? Because she doesn't see what you see. Silent Hill is a different place for everyone, and the best thing is that it is all left to the player's interpretation of the game. Nowadays, we would get a 15-minute introduction cutscene with tons of exposition explaining the shifting nature of that ghost town called Silent Hill. 4. Amazing use of sound effects and soundtrack. Silent Hill 2 knows when to play a track and when not to. That way, immersion is not broken. Players can be left with their own thoughts and think about what is going on. Compare.
Maybe it's all we deserve.
We.
Me. You.
Five, it breaks away from trends. Too many games nowadays feel that skill trees, crafting, and open-world exploration are necessary elements to have a successful game. Thankfully, Bloober Team kept things faithful to the original material and did the remake without any of these features. James is not an overpowered character either. He's no Leon or Ada in Resident Evil 6, jumping around, laying on their backs, rolling, sprinting, and evading, dodging. He's just a normal, quote-unquote normal citizen who hasn't received any firearms training, and the game shows it to us by leaving James' finger always on the trigger. Very poor trigger discipline indeed, James. Anyway, it's cool to control someone who has no idea why they're there, what they are doing there, and is almost as clueless as we are. It creates a better bond with the character and doesn't provide us a sensation of safety that a professional zombie hunter does. Lastly, the locations and the enemies are truly horrifying. James really is in a sexy nightmare of his own. The designs of some of those things are straight up nauseous. Look at this thing. Jesus! In spite of how well designed some of these creatures are, my second complaint about the game is also tied to the enemies. And that's the lack of variety. Essentially, we have 5 different types of enemies. The Creeper, or Beetle, for those of you who haven't bothered to look up for their names online, completely comprehensible. The Creeper is an insect that dies in 1 hit. Okay, cool. What's next? The Lying Figure, or sexy lady inside of a skin bag, dies in 5 to 8 hits, vomits acid, and has no arms. There's a variant that crawls very fast. The Mannequin, whose main approach to combat is being a silent bastard, has legs instead of arms. In Toluca Prison, we can see it has a spider variant. The Mandarin, or... You know what? I have no idea how to call this. Leave your ideas in the comment section. It hangs from the ceiling and uses its swifty little tongue to attack you. Last but not least, the Nurse, who can use a knife or a metal pipe as a weapon. Essentially, we are looking at 5 enemies. Maybe 4.5, I mean, the insect is quite uninspiring, and their variants. 4.5 enemies with non-varying close quarters combat for a 20 or so hour adventure is bonkers. Here I thought Resident Evil 7 got lazy with its molded. At least the fighting was varied with them back then. The fact that every enemy represents James' sex deprivation is nice. I don't know how the Beetle is part of that tale, but it is there. At any rate, you guys must improve the gameplay loop for your next delivery. It is one of the few flaws I can see in this game. So, as a little summary of the things we've been through, what do we need to create a good horror game? Well, the developers of a horror title must create a game with balanced difficulty that doesn't rely much on jump scares, but rather building dread over time through its ambience, soundtrack, and sound effects. One that has good pacing, providing us with enough action and exposition sequences. And for those exposition sequences to matter, the story and the characters have to be original. Utterly important, addictive gameplay where combat is not dumbed down to hitting something 3 times and bailing. And lastly, enemy and level designs that will give Resident Evil 4's Regenerator and its abandoned hospital a run for their money. Ah yeah, and no bugs please. Do you think I am asking too much? Leave a comment in case you would like to suggest something that I may have missed. See you in the next one, comrades!